Today, we're really jumping into the evolving world of WoW Classic, going beyond how it just launched back in 2019.
Yeah, we've got a good set of sources here. We're looking at, community projects, private servers, Blizzard's own attempts, and importantly, how players reacted to all of it.
Exactly. So our mission really is to unpack these different ways people are trying to evolve that vanilla experience. We'll look hard at community stuff like Turtle WoW, what people are calling Vanilla Plus, and then contrast that with Blizzard's Season of Discovery.
Right, drawing insights from the sources about what these different approaches actually tell us, what works, what the players seem to want.
Because it's this whole scene, isn't it? It's built on, well, nostalgia, obviously, but also real player passion. And there's this fascinating history where the community, the unofficial scene, actually nudged the official game into existence.
Absolutely. We kind of need to set that stage first. Look at the private server history where these players were before Official Classic.
Okay, let's do that. The history of Unofficial Classic. It goes back further than some might think. The Mangoes project, open source server code, that started around 2005.
Yeah, Mangoes was the foundation. It was the tech that let people run their own servers trying to mimic patch 1.12, which is sort of the definitive vanilla patch for many.
And that led to the rise of these Blizz-like private realms. They essentially kept vanilla alive while the main game, Retail WoW W, moved on through expansion after expansion.
Right, Burning Crusade, Wrath, all that. These servers catered to a group who just preferred that original feel. Harder, more community-focused,
And the sources point to a really key moment, the shutdown of Nestarius in 2016. A huge private server.
Yeah, that shutdown was massive. It didn't kill the desire, though. It actually amplified it, weirdly enough.
It really did. There was this huge public reaction. I remember the petition, the sources say it got something like 280,000 signatures.
And Blizzard themselves, they've admitted it.
Yeah.
They said that outpouring, that petition, it definitely sped up their internal talks about making WoW W Classic official.
So you have this unofficial community effort directly influencing the official product. It's pretty wild.
It is. Now, the sources do touch on the legal side of things with private servers. It's worth mentioning.
Right. Legally, if you host a server, you're basically infringing copyright. You're running Blizzard's code without permission. That seems pretty clear.
Yeah, the operators take the big risk playing on one that technically breaks the EULA, the agreement you click through. But the sources suggest players aren't usually the target for legal action.
It seems Blizzard steps in legally when their business feels threatened. The sources mention older cases like BNetD or MDY versus Blizzard, and basically when third parties impacted their bottom line with hacks or competing services.
So Blizzard protects its turf, naturally, but the community found a way and even, spurred Blizzard into action with Classic.
Which leads us perfectly into how that community energy then started thinking beyond just recreating vanilla, towards evolving it. And the sources really highlight Turtle WoWity as a major example of this Vanilla Plus idea.
Yeah, Turtle WoW is fascinating because based on these sources, they're adding things but trying hard to keep that core classic vibe. The sources detail some specific features that seem really popular.
Let's get into those because they show a different philosophy. First up, this slow and steady mode. What's that about?
Okay, so it's optional. You can take this glyph at level 1 and it just halves your XP gain. Makes leveling way slower.
Why would people want that?
Well, the sources suggest it's for players who love the journey, the exploration, not just racing to max level, and it rewards them with cosmetic items every 10 levels or so. Importantly, you're not separated. You can still play with people who aren't using it.
Interesting. So it's opt-in exploration focus. Then they've added new playable races, high elves and goblins.
Yeah, and the sources mention they come with custom voice lines, racial quests. The appeal seems to be offering fresh ways to play if you like making alts, but without fundamentally changing the level 60 game or adding new classes.
Keeps things fresh but familiar.
Yep.
And in-game, they've got a new 40-player Karazhan raid.
That's right, the Tower of Karazhan. Sources say it launched just recently, April 2025. It's designed for 40 players, level 60 cap, with loot that's kind of like tier 3.5 balance for classic item power levels.
So a new big raid, but fitting the old style, not just throwing in something overpowered from a later expansion.
Exactly. The sources emphasize that's appreciated new challenges, but respecting the vanilla framework and power curve.
The sources also mention a strong roleplay first attitude, server-supported events, even an add-on for custom profiles.
Yeah, the Turtle RP add-on. Custom names, titles, backstories. According to the sources, this really helps build a strong community identity. People get invested in their characters, the server world. It potentially leads to, a less toxic environment sometimes.
Fostering that social fabric. And finally, maybe one of the most telling things that sources point out, their transparent roadmap.
Oh yeah, this seems huge for player trust. They publish a clear schedule for 2025-26. Plans for mid-level zone updates, profession changes, new story stuff.
So players know what's coming. They're not just waiting in the dark for the next surprise drop, which, as we'll see, contrasts quite a bit with other approaches.
Yeah.
It builds reliability.
Right. So if you put it all together, what the sources suggest is that Turtle WoW W's success in its niche comes from encouraging exploration, adding replayability that fits, providing challenging classic-style endgame, building community, and being transparent. It feels very deliberate.
A measured evolution.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pivot now to Blizzard's big official experiment, Season of Discovery, or SOD. Very different approach.
Very different. And it just recently finished its main content cycle, right? Phase 8 launched April 2025. Scarlet Enclave Raid opened April 10th.
The absolute core of SOD was the rune system. Finding these runes, engraving them onto gear, it completely changed what classes could do.
Yeah, this was pure experimentation within Classic. You had Warlock tanks, Mage healers, roles that just didn't exist in 1.12.
And the sources definitely showed there was a lot of initial excitement for that. Players liked the novelty, the shakeup.
But, and this is a big but highlighted frequently in the sources, there was also a really significant rise in players talking about burnout, just exhaustion.
And that burnout, reading through the source feedback, it wasn't just about the runes themselves being good or bad mechanically.
No, it was overwhelmingly tied to the pace. That super fast 8-phase release cycle, level cap increases, new raids, new gear grinds, constantly.
It felt like a sprint, didn't it? Not that slower burn of original Classic. The sources really indicate that this cadence, this speed, just wore a lot of players down. Trying to keep up felt like a job.
Yeah, the constant resets, the gearing loops, it just caused fatigue. And the sources confirm, while the SOD servers are staying up, the dev team's moving on, the experiment phase is kinda over.
Okay, so I've got these two clear pictures from the sources. Turtle Whale W, slower, community-focused, adding things that fit, clear communication. SOD Day, rapid, experimental, class bending, but plagued by burnout linked to its relentless pace.
And looking at these side by side, the sources definitely suggest some potential lessons for Blizzard if they ever try something like a permanent Classic Plus again.
Right, what worked versus what caused friction. One thing the sources imply is the value of investing in the mid-game. Level, say, 15 to 50.
Yeah, Classic often feels like a rush through those zones to get to 60. Sources note Turtle WoW adding content there keeps leveling engaging, makes alts more fun, not just a chore.
Makes sense. Another idea clearly supported by Turtle WoW's approach in the sources, optional slow modes.
Exactly, like they're slow and steady, let people choose their pace. If you want to explore, great. If you want to level faster, fine. It gives agency without splitting the player base, which sources suggest players really like.
And the success of that 40-player Karazhan on Turtle WoW points towards delivering lore-friendly plus raids. New endgame, yes, but make it feel like it belongs in Classic itemization and all.
Yeah, not just porting over something from a later expansion that breaks the power curve. Fit it into the existing world.
The sources also suggest natively supporting RP tools could be beneficial. Something like that Turtle RP add-on may be integrated officially.
It could help build that social connection, that community identity. The sources praise on Turtle WoW, make it feel more like a world, less like just a lobby for raids or BGs.
And the roadmap point seems crucial. Turtle WoW's transparency builds trust, sets expectations. The sources contrast this sharply with SOD's fast, sometimes surprising phases, which seem to contribute to that burnout feeling.
Definitely. Publish a plan, give players an idea of what's coming and roughly when. It avoids that feeling of constantly being blindsided or rushed.
Which ties into the biggest lesson, perhaps, suggested by the sources, scaling the content cadence.
Absolutely. The sources are pretty clear. So 30D's 8-phase sprint was just too much, too fast for a large segment of the player base. It led directly to burnout.
So maybe fewer updates, but make them more substantial. Deliver them slower, more predictably, more like original Classics pacing, or how Turtle WoW W seems to be managing it.
That seems to be the strong suggestion coming from the contrast in the source material. A slower, more sustainable rhythm might keep players engaged long-term without burning them out. The sheer speed of SOD appears to have been its major flaw, according to the player feedback.
So pulling it all together, SOD was definitely bold with the runes and class experiments. But the sources suggest the delivery, the speed, and cadence was the problem.
Whereas community projects like Turtle WoW, focusing on that measured pace, community building, additions that feel like natural extensions, and clear communication, they offer really valuable clues about what works for this audience.
It seems, based on the sources, if Blizzard wants a truly successful long-term Classic Plus, they might really benefit from looking at what makes these community servers tick. Focus on the journey, the community, transparency, and a sustainable pace. Not just rapid, potentially disruptive mechanical changes dropped constantly.
Yeah, learn from both experiments, the official and the unofficial ones.
So wrapping up this deep dive, our sources paint this really interesting picture. You've got community efforts like Turtle WoW W showing a path for a slower, more integrated Vanilla Plus, which seems to resonate well in terms of pacing and community.
And then you have Blizzard's OSUD, which, while innovative in some ways, the sources tell us really struggled with player burnout because of that incredibly fast release schedule.
So understanding these different approaches, the community reactions drawn from the sources, it gives you, the listener, a much clearer sense of the dynamics here. What clicks with Classic players long term?
It really does.
And it leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. Reflecting on USOD's burnout problem tied to its speed, and Turtle WoW W's apparent success with its slower additions and community focus, as presented in our sources. What do you think is the absolute most critical thing for Blizzard to get right if they were to try and build a Classic Plus that actually lasts? What keeps players truly invested for the long haul?